People, what is your "we will never speak of this again" story? Story 1. Back in high school, my two best buddies, Paul and Jeff, and I played Pokemon cards. Every weekend, we went to the mall to play at the gym there. One weekend, after finishing a game, we were wandering around the mall. Take note, Paul was rich, and we were waiting for his driver to come pick him up and take him home. Jeff and I were also into computer games, so while wandering, we decided to visit a nearby computer cafe to watch some people play. After about 30 minutes, we got bored and decided to roam around again. As we were walking, we noticed two guys in front of us who were talking and looking in our direction. The other guy walked off as we got closer, and the one who stayed behind approached us and started talking. He introduced himself as Romy. Romy said he worked at the computer shop we had just visited and explained that some kids had stolen the shop's earnings from the cash register. They were now trying to track down the people caught on the CCTV cameras leaving the establishment. The three of us were already in shock and immediately denied the allegations. "We didn't do it." Romy then said he knew we hadn't, but he was just tired of the situation. Since he knew they wouldn't find the culprit, he explained that, to appease his manager, he needed at least two of us to come back to the shop. He wanted to present us to the manager as the only people they found, show that we weren't guilty, and stop the search because it was pointless. They just wanted someone to show so they could be done with it. Paul was skeptical, and Jeff was always just whatever. But me? I was the gullible kid, always willing to help. Even though the other two were hesitant, I convinced them it was for a good cause. So we told Romy we'd do it. The look on that jerk's face was priceless. Romy had a plan. To make sure we didn't carry anything, he asked us to leave all our belongings with Paul's cell phones, wallets, money, everything. That way when we were presented, we would have nothing on us. We were confused, but figured, whatever, let's just get this over with. So we did as he asked. Then off we went. We told Paul we'd be back and that it would be quick. While we were walking, Romy was talking to us. I can't remember exactly what, but eventually we were no longer heading toward the shop. The shop was on the 4th floor, and there was no way there could be a shortcut from the ground floor, so I started to feel nervous. I know this mall like the back of my hand, and I knew if there was any sign we were heading outside, we could ditch him. I began walking slowly, trying to signal Jeff that something was wrong, but as always he just said, "What?" We were already at the exit when I said to Romy, "This isn't the shop," he replied. "I know, but our manager is right there, at the entrance." I said, "Okay, let's go." The moment he turned his back, I grabbed Jeff by the shoulder and whispered, "Run! Let's go to Paul." Then I bolted as fast as I could. I almost left Jeff behind in my rush. As I raced to meet Paul, I suddenly saw him with the first guy Romy had been talking to before introducing himself. They were on the escalator, and the guy had a hand on Paul's shoulder. When he saw me, he looked shocked and said, "What happened? You were with Romy?" I yelled back, "Yeah, but I don't care. We're going home." Then he said, "All right, the two of you stay here," and ran after them. We were completely confused at that point, so I asked Paul what had happened. He said the other guy claimed to be an associate of Romy, and that Jeff and I were found guilty, and that Paul was supposed to come with them as well. The guy was demanding our belongings, but Paul refused and said he wanted to see us first. Paul also told me that the guy had already started shoving him, so he went along because the guy was beginning to hurt him. We were still in shock, and Jeff was nowhere to be found. Paul and I retraced the route Jeff and I had taken and eventually found the guy casually walking and looking around, trying to find us. He had no idea what was really happening. We tried to report him to one of the mall guards, but they just shrugged us off. From that day on, we decided not to tell anyone because we didn't want to risk losing the chance to play Pokemon cards if our parents found out. Even now, when we're chatting and reminiscing about childhood memories, Paul and Jeff still blame me for the incident, saying that's what I get for always being willing to help. We still remember that guy's face, and whenever we hang out, we like to play a game called Spot Romy. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. This fateful night from hell happened about 6 years ago with my not long after ex-girlfriend, whom I will call L. We had been dating for about a year when I decided to take her on a trip to Malaysia for some snorkeling. My dad lived there at the time and agreed to pay half the airfare if we spent a few days with him in Kuala Lumpur. On day 3 of the trip, we stopped for a big late lunch at a street vendor restaurant that my dad swears by. The overnight bus to the snorkeling islands doesn't stop for food, so this was our last chance to eat. All was well, the food was great, and the iced tea wasn't bad either. After lunch, we headed home, got our things ready, and went to the bus station. We got our tickets, loaded our stuff onto the bus, picked the very first row behind the driver, and off we went. About 3 hours into the trip, the bus was completely full of tourists like us, deep in rural Malaysia, when my stomach started performing darn Russian gymnastics. I told Il that something didn't feel right and that I wasn't feeling well. She said she felt fine and not to worry. Half an hour later, things were getting exponentially worse. I was now clenching for dear life, sweating profusely, praying to God that disaster didn't strike, literally. It was about midnight, and we were in the middle of a jungle on the only road for miles. I was squirming in my seat, and finally told the bus driver he needed to pull over so I could use the bathroom. Not far, we stopped shortly, he said casually, continuing to drive, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb baking deep within my bowels behind him. 5 minutes later, I pleaded again, trying to stay quiet so the other 20-plus passengers wouldn't notice. "Sir, you need to pull over. I really need to go." Finally, we stopped, and I got off, followed by 4 other people. I ran as fast as I could without losing tension in my buns, barely making it to the back of the bus. I pulled my pants down, and holy crap, it came out furiously. I wasn't very experienced at squatting with shorts still around my ankles, and needless to say, it went everywhere. I had to ditch my underwear, find a clean corner to do what little I could, and finally get back on the bus last, with the mess barely contained. I sat down, feeling a little better, until I could smell it. The remnants that hadn't made it onto the undies or behind my shoes were unmistakable. I leaned over to LOMG. "I think it's on me. I can smell it." She was mortified, pretending to be asleep against the window. "I know," she replied. "I can smell it too." I am pretty sure anyone else in the first half of the bus could smell it as well. We didn't speak a word for the next couple of hours. Does it end there? Hell no. An hour later, it was back, worse than ever, striking with full vengeance. I asked the driver how far we were from the pit stop. "Only 30 minutes. "Not far," he replied. 29 minutes of extreme clenching with no undies and no safety net followed. As we pulled into the shack of a bus depot, I yelled at the driver, "Stop now," feeling the inevitable about to happen. He didn't listen. I ran to the door, shouting for him to stop. As he finally did, I lost what felt like liters of liquid diarrhea all over the stairwell and entrance of the bus. I made a beeline for the bathroom, which had 6 or so shower stalls next to each other, and began washing my crap-covered clothes, shoes, and myself. I texted Elle, asking her to bring my bag so I could change. She tossed it over the stall, and I changed, putting my barely clean clothes back in the bag. I could hear people talking about the mess on the bus, saying things like, "Can you believe that dude crapped on the bus?" It was humiliating. When I got back to the bus, I saw the driver had laid newspaper all over the stairs and entrance, trying to soak up the mess like you would after a dog had an accident in the house. I'd never felt so embarrassed in my life. 4 hours later, we were on a ferry with the rest of the bus. Daylight had come, and I could see the looks. I knew they all knew. Brutal. The only silver lining? Elle ended up in the same situation. Once we got off the ferry, she had to jump into the water and crap in the ocean while pretending she wasn't. That made me smile for the first time in what felt like forever. We never spoke of it again. Story 3. This one's a doozy. The first time I went to my weekly social group, a girl there told me about another girl at the group who had thrown a tantrum at a party the group had held that summer. I joined the group in mid-October. I didn't think much of it. I had meltdowns myself until I was about 8, and I had grown out of them. We weren't having a party that day, but I think we were listing traits important for getting and keeping a job. Sometime in late November or so, one kid kept raising his hand, James I think his name was, and kept interrupting Caroline. Caroline slowly got up. The group leader looked at her expectantly, as if waiting for her to say something. I glanced at her, as did everyone else, and their behavioral health professionals. Her expression was clearly pissed off. And then, she had a meltdown. Almost everyone sitting in chairs scrambled to stand up and back away, including me. If Caroline had had the strength, she might have picked up the other plastic table sitting nearby, which fortunately contained no projectiles, but instead she kicked it forcefully. For the next 5 minutes, all you could hear was screaming. Caroline screaming, the group leader screaming, and Brianna's BHP, who would later become my BHP, trying to subdue her and calm her down, all to no avail. One of my friends, Sarah, was in tears as she clung to her BHP for comfort. My BHP, who was actually the supervisor of the other BHPs, went to help restrain Caroline. She bit at the adult's arms, kicked and screamed with all her might. At one point, she broke free and grabbed a small hand crank radio sitting on the table she had just kicked, hurling it straight at James. It didn't get very far, he was too far away, but he immediately ran to his BHP, who was standing next to me. I didn't even need to look into his eyes to know he was terrified. A few BHPs stood back and didn't help guide the 2 teens in the group who were severely disabled in one way or another. One was a kid named Nick, who had intellectual disability and severe autism, and the other was my friend Brianna, who wore a leg brace and had difficulty walking. They were taken to safety. I composed myself and stood strong, managing to take a few teens in the group, including Sarah and Brianna, under my wing for the time being, keeping them safe while my BHP helped handle Caroline. Those who stayed behind evacuated the building under the group leader's orders. Patrick, the manager of the agency where the group was run, wasn't in the building at the time. Later, my BHP told me that he praised everyone involved for their swift thinking and quick actions. Eventually, Caroline calmed down somewhat. She stormed upstairs, and all you could hear was a resounding slam that would have been loud enough to hear from the next house over. Sarah was still in tears. I was just scared for my life. Brianna was in shock. We all hugged for a long time and didn't dare glance upstairs. The group leader, Tina, my BHP at the time, and supervisor Hannah, along with my future and now current BHP Heidi, emerged with tousled hair, bite marks on their arms, and expressions that were a mix of exhaustion and fear. After a while, Tina tried to explain what had happened, naturally sugarcoating some of the events. We were escorted back inside, and the group ended early that Thursday. When Sarah and I got home, I called her. She said she was still terrified. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, she called me again, saying she was having nightmares about the incident, but didn't want to wake her parents. She had broken up with her boyfriend about a month prior, so he wasn't an option either. Caroline was absent from the group for a long time. Months went by, and no one spoke about her. Eventually, she aged out of the teen group, and I haven't seen her since. The group leader never dares to bring it up. The funny thing is, Caroline is usually a calm, leader-like person, but that was the angriest I've ever seen her. The next day, I met up with Courtney, the girl who had told me about Caroline's incident at the summer party. We went to the mall and had a good time, and then yesterday's incident came up in conversation. Courtney stopped walking, looked me in the eyes, and said, "That happened last summer too, at that party?" She almost broke Donna's, her BHP's arm. She didn't throw anything or seriously harm anyone, but no one messed with her after that. I guess that was her point. "Why did she stay?" I asked, curious. Why did she stick with the teen group? Because she wasn't old enough for the adult group. Donna told me she was only 19. We remained mostly silent for the rest of the time. Since then, that incident has gone down in history at the group, but no one talks about it. As I am typing this, I am getting horrifying flashbacks of what could have happened. What if that radio had hit me in the head? What if she had broken free and charged at me or one of my other friends? Thankfully, we haven't had anyone as aggressive as Caroline since, trying to make sure that anyone with anger management issues of any sort doesn't join the group, and for good reason. Story 4. Let me preface this story with a disclaimer. I was a jerk when I was younger, and I am fully aware of and apologetic for my youthful transgressions. I also know that apologies don't erase bad acts or displays of bad behavior, and knowing this has only made me a slightly reformed and regretful jerk. But I am trying, Ringo. I am trying real hard. I was 19 and thought I was awesome. I had a decently paying job that I lucked into, a crappy, but for a 19-year-old kind of pimp white Volvo, and I was paying 3/4 of the rent on a 3-bedroom house with my brother. I was good enough at skateboarding that I thought I could have made a career of it, and I had fully come out of my shell by 17, realizing I was actually desirable to the opposite gender. I'd had the job and the house for a full year, and it had been pretty much a non-stop party every night since. I wasn't particularly strong or smart, so I couldn't compete with my peers in those areas. But I could spin a pretty good yarn, was confident, and had just enough charm to flirt with a girl or two. In hindsight, they were low-hanging fruit, and I was an idiot. My way of feeling important and special was that some women were interested in me. I fancied myself a ladies' man. It's cringy to think about, and even worse to remember as something you actually did. I had this notion that I was going to try to get with as many different girls as I could, apparently with no regard for them, a selfish, idiotic mindset. One sunny Saturday, I had just finished racing my roommate down a grueling downhill mountain bike course without a helmet, of course, because I wasn't a nerd. The whole morning was spent hiking up the hill. All the while, we were passing around a fifth of Cutty Sark Scotch between us. We even tried to baton pass it a couple of times, going downhill to no avail. By the time we reached the bottom, we had polished off the whole thing and were pretty buzzed. The sun was beginning to set, so it was time to find a party. We found one a couple of streets down from my house and bicycled over. I was still pretty buzzed and riding the high of adrenaline. I walked in feeling good and quickly ran into a couple of kids I had gone to school with. We chatted and did some shots. They introduced me to a friend of theirs from another town. She was 3 years older than me and had been a lesbian pretty much since puberty. But she was really attractive. I had always pictured lesbians as more masculine. But she was petite-framed, black-haired, blue-eyed, and beautiful, with full-sleeve tattoos and a shorter Beatles-style haircut that hinted at her physical proclivities. I instantly wanted her, and, in typical inconsiderate fashion, was determined to make her want me too, regardless of her orientation. The well-lubricated version of me got us some drinks and managed to seclude us in a corner at the party. I pulled out everything I had to try to talk to her without coming off as desperate or creepy. I don't remember much of what I said, but I do recall telling her that I could just stare into her amazing eyes all night and be content. That they were so blue they made any sapphire I'd ever seen look shabby by comparison. She was beautiful. That was the main reason I was hitting on her. But part of me also thought that flirting with a lesbian would be some kind of accolade. Within half an hour, I was somehow hitting it off with her well enough to get her alone at my place. a couple of streets away. We were both kind of drunk by my drunken estimation. We seemed to be on the same level. And this is where I made the pivotal mistake of the night. We were both a little uneasy now that we were alone in an intimate setting, so I suggested another drink to ease the tension and give us time to get more comfortable. The problem? The only booze I had was spiced rum that had been transferred into a water bottle, kicked around my floor, and left sitting in the sun for a week. She took a sip. Being a damn man, I took a large, foreboding gulp myself. We talked, and eventually we ended up, well, being pretty close. Everything seemed fine until about midway when the newly introduced booze hit my system like a freight train and put Rod Stewart to sleep. The encounter petered out from there, finishing with her awkwardly saying, "I am just gonna go," and my only response being a weak, "Yep." It was pretty pitiful, but not entirely unwarranted. I had flown too close to the sun. I called her after she left, and left a voicemail suggesting we keep this between us since we ran in the same circles and that we agree on a story for leaving together that night. She was very nice, and we did agree to cover up what really happened. We became really good friends after that, though we never explored that route again. But now, spiced rum is forbidden in my household, and I avoid it wherever I go, even in a mixed drink. Nothing covers up the flavor of shame. Story 5. My buddies and I actually voiced the phrase, "We can never tell this story," in the truck afterward. It was a road trip with two friends, Cal and Joel. Driving home late at night, we were all tired of sitting in the truck and just ready to be home, so we drove through the night to rack up the miles. Finally, around 3 a.m., we pulled off the highway onto a forest road and drove until we found a spot to camp. It was a decent grassy clearing. Looks like someone else had the same idea before. We piled out, grabbed our tents, and started setting up. Joel was quiet and tired. Cal, on the other hand, has the inhuman ability to speak in a continuous run-on sentence for hours. It doesn't matter what time it is, wake him up at 4 a.m. and he'll start telling a story before his feet hit the ground. He's funny too, which keeps the road trip interesting. While setting up camp, Cal was deep in a half-story, half-rhetorical essay when he suddenly stopped. Cold, I shone my headlamp on him, and his light trailed off into the trees. "Are those eyes?" I looked where he was looking and stared for a good while. Might just be dew on the leaves, or a marker on the trees. Wouldn't be surprised if this road is used for motorcycle races. We watched a while longer, neither of us able to relax. Finally, I grabbed a shovel and started walking toward the little glowing beads. Neither of us was going to sleep without resolution. "Friggin' guys, go to bed," Joel announced confidently. "There are no predators in this area." There were. I've seen both bears and cougars around here. Joel wasn't from the area, so Cal and I continued on. I covered about half the distance between me and the orbs, and paused. It was so dark and they were so far away I couldn't tell if they were moving slightly or if it was just shadows from my headlamp. I threw a rock. I yelled. I paused. Then they blinked. "Okay. Yep, it's an animal, and it's not scared by rocks," I said to Cal, slowly backing up. "It clearly sees us. It's watching me." Cal agreed. "Let's just watch it for a while." We finished setting up our tents, keeping a light on the creature at all times. Finally, it started to move. The two little orbs rose a few inches off the ground and began strafing us, rocking ever so slightly back and forth as they traced a wide circle around our campsite. There were slight pauses here and there, but they kept closing in even as we unleashed a thunderstorm of rocks and yelling quickly, sidestepping toward the truck. Joel, whatever it is, it's moving our way. Keep a light on it. Keep a light on it." Joel yelled, fumbling with his tent zipper. He'd already taken his pants off and came sprinting toward the truck, his pale thighs glowing like twin headlights. He got inside and flopped into the back. Cal and I perched on either side of the truck, ready to jump in so fast we'd probably knock heads on the gear shift. The creature was behind a bush about 20 feet from the truck now. The leaves shifted slightly. It was still coming. Cal and I exchanged a few words of encouragement. Waiting, and then the bushes parted. When the claw sank into Cal's neck, he screamed, and I dove over the cab. Just kidding. A frigging deer strolled out and walked right up to the truck. Turns out people had camped here before and apparently fed the deer. Whatever survival instinct this long-legged forest rodent once had was long gone. Meanwhile, we were 3 grown men in our jammies, crouched in a truck, hiding from it. Full disclosure, I've told this story a few other times. Story 6. College story time! Let's do this! I have a couple of moments I think are worthy, but I will keep them brief. 1. I used to play chicken with my best friend in college. Basically, we were 2 straight guys who thought it was clever to edge closer and closer to touching tongues until one of us caved and yelled, "Yo crap, that was too close." We were dumb. One night, after a big night of partying, we went back to our dorm with some girls we both liked. For some reason, we thought our room was the perfect place to play chicken. This time, we actually made contact full tongue to tongue. The girls looked at us, morbidly confused, probably assuming we were about to go at it with each other right there. Instead, we both jolted backward and froze. The girls left, and we just stared at each other before going to bed. We still don't talk about it, and it's been 5 years. 2. I was at a Halloween house party my sophomore year. Fast forward past all the chaos, earlier in the night, I met this girl, a freshman at my school. We were both completely trashed and having a good time. At one point, she turns to me, and we start making out. I asked if she wanted to leave, and we headed back to campus. Now, when I say I was trashed, I mean a garbage person could have seen me on the side of the street and mistakenly thrown me into the compactor. I was so drunk that halfway through the half-mile walk back to campus, I had completely forgotten we were going home to, presumably, Plus, I'd gotten tired, so I looked at her and asked, "So, here's how the conversation went, as I recall it." She asked, "Do you want to go to your place?" I replied, "My roommates are home and I really don't want to do that to them." She said, "Okay, well, my roommate isn't okay with me having guys over, so we can go to my place." I muttered, "Dang." Minutes of silence passed. Cool. I thought internally, I guess I get to go home and sleep off this drunken stopper. She asked, "So where should we go then?" Wait, what? I thought. Wait, what? I asked aloud. Like, is there anywhere on campus we can go? She said. Wait, what? I thought again. Jokingly, I said, "Well, since I am an engineer, I have access to the photonics building." Haha. She said, "Okay, let's go there." Wait, what? Nope, I am not doing that, I thought. Sure, it's over this way, I said, resigning myself. So we walked over to the photonics building, and I swiped us in. Now, a quick pause to describe the scene. It had been sprinkling outside all night, but nothing crazy. We had been at a Halloween party, so we were both in costume. Me, a beach bro. God, I hate myself in swim trunks. Sperry's a bro tank and sunglasses, her a soccer player, shin guards and all. It was about 1 to 1:30 in the morning when we arrived at the photonics building. As we entered, a custodian was buffing the floor of the entrance. He looked at us with slight confusion and a face that said, "Why are college kids so freaking weird?" We shyly walked past him down the main hall, at which point this conversation occurred. I asked, "Okay, so where should we go?" She said, "Well, you know this place better than me, so where do you think we should go?" "Trying to end this game of chicken," I replied. "Haha, well, there's a restroom around the corner. We can go there." There's no way she'll say yes to that, I thought. She said, "Okay, let's go there." I just want to go to bed, I thought. Okay, I said, resigned. So, we got to the restroom around the corner, and I noticed the cleaning chemicals sitting outside. Usually, that means the restrooms on this floor had already been cleaned. We snuck in, and of course, no one was there, but I was still ready to cop out and go to bed, mentally running through excuses. We went into the handicap stall. I am so sorry to anyone who knows this location and uses it, and started making out pretty intensely. A couple of minutes in, I came up with a plan. I said, "Dang, I didn't bring a rubber with me. I am sorry. I really don't like to do this without protection." She replied, "That's all right. I still had a really great night." We paused, drunkenly looking at each other with desire, then started making out again. Things started getting a little more heated than I was ready for. Suddenly, she pushed me against the wall. "You need to go get a rubber," she said firmly. "Run, you dumb son of a... Run!" I thought internally. "Okay," I said aloud, resigning myself. I headed out of the restroom, leaving her in the stall behind me. When I got to the entrance of the photonics building, I looked outside. It was now raining cats and dogs. I stepped out in my beach attire and sprinted to the nearest convenience store. "Just run back to your dorm and go to bed. Don't defile yourself like this." I thought, "You know we've already lost this battle, so just let it happen," I muttered to my internal self. At the register, I said aloud to the man behind the counter, "Excuse me, would you mind grabbing me that pack of rubber on the wall?" The register man eyed me like the freak I was and pointed at the wrong box. "Oh, you mean these right here, my man?" he said. "No, sorry," I replied. "The purple box to the left." He again, pointing to the wrong box, said, "Oh, you mean these, my dude?" "Nope," I replied. "The next one's over. The hair pleasure, the 3-pack, please." He finally grabbed the right box and came to ring it up. "All right, I got you, my man." "No problem. Will there be anything else for you?" "No thanks. Just this tonight," I said. "All right, my man. My man is going to have a good night tonight." "All right, then," he said with a grin. "Just say the word, and I will off both of us right now." I thought internally, "Haha, thanks." "Not yet, brain. Not yet," I muttered aloud. I grabbed my purchase and left the convenience store, back into the pouring rain. Jogging back to the photonics building, I thought, "What the heck am I doing? She's not even going to be there. She definitely came to her senses and left. This is so dumb. Damn, bro, you need a chill pill," I muttered to myself internally. I swiped into photonics, and as I entered, the same custodian from before came around the corner, still buffing. He saw me soaking wet rubber in hand and stopped. I was far too ashamed to look at him, so I squeaked past, noticing him just shaking his head. I felt like Cersei walking through the streets of King's Landing. I made it back to the restroom, and to my amazement, she was still there. I showed her what I had bought, and we did it again. Afterward, I walked her back to her dorm and kissed her goodnight before trekking back to my own dorm. When I entered my room, my roommates were still awake and happily surprised to see me. They said, "Hey, how was your night?" I replied, "I had some fun on the bathroom floor of photonics. I don't want to talk about it. Good night." They exclaimed, "What?" I proceeded to explain to them everything I've just told you. They were speechless and then laughed really hard. It's not really a story I hide from people, except for my family. Oh God, my poor mother would have a heart attack if she knew what a degenerate her son was in college. Story 7. So, I had just returned from spring vacation in Mexico. My best friend, let's call him John for the sake of privacy, came over with a bottle of Jim Beam for us to drink. I had never had alcohol before, and he had only once. Around 11 o'clock in the evening, we drove to the park down the street from my house, set up our shot glasses and the alcohol on a table, and started drinking. I got drunk first, but I was only having a Coke and whiskey mix, so I didn't get sloppy, Mostly I could still think clearly. John, however, kept drinking. He started with a mixed drink, but as the night went on, he began drinking straight from the bottle. Before I knew it, half the bottle was gone. That's when he started making suggestions. First, he tried to play with his joystick. It wasn't really working, and then he asked me to do the same. Keep in mind, I am a very passive person and was also drunk. I don't really remember why or how, but somehow I did it. By this time, I was starting to feel very confused and frustrated because John was acting like someone I had never seen before. It was like he was a completely different person, and I couldn't reason with him. He started helping me, you know. I didn't want it, but felt kind of bad and didn't know what to do. It was a few seconds before I reacted and pushed him off. Thankfully, he stopped. He kept drinking, and the bottle went down to about a third left. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't. He outweighed me by about 120 pounds and was very protective of his alcohol. Finally, I decided we should go home. I asked him for the keys to drive, but he insisted it was his car, so he would drive. I knew that was ridiculous, even if the house was just around the corner, but I couldn't stop him. He drove around the block and managed to knock over 2 or 3 trash cans, though I can't remember exactly, and then did the worst parking job I had ever seen. We went upstairs to my room, and he took out a corn magazine and started doing it in the middle of the floor. He told me to join him, but I said no, and instead went downstairs to cook some chicken and bacon, hoping he would have something to bring him down from being so drunk. I was stressing quite a bit because my sister and her friend were sleeping just down the hall, and I didn't want them to wake up and see John. I brought the bacon and chicken upstairs and gave it to him. He started eating, so I went down the hall to the bathroom to take a shower. A few minutes into my stress-relieving shower, John came in. He started to get in. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. He got in anyway, so I got out and went back to my room. I changed into my pajamas, ate some bacon, and then went back to check on him in the bathroom. He was standing in his boxers outside of the shower, leaning against the wall, and there was vomit everywhere on the walls, in the shower, in the hallway, and even on the carpet. It was the most awful smell I had ever experienced. I walked him over to the couch, helped him lie down, and put a blanket over him so my sister wouldn't see him in the morning. He was out. Thank goodness. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had to clean all of this up without waking my family. I grabbed tons of paper towels and cleaner and went to work on the vomit. I managed to get most of it cleaned up in about 2 hours, but the smell lingered. I lit around 12 candles everywhere and ran fans to air out the bathroom. Unfortunately, the candles were small and melted very quickly. The ones I put in the hallway melted onto the carpet and then hardened. I tried to clean it, but there is still wax in the carpet even to this day. The other candles I tried to pour down the sink. What a stupid idea! And they instantly hardened in the drain, which made cleaning a real pain. By 5 o'clock in the morning, I was pretty much done and could hear my dad waking up for work downstairs. I went to bed. The next day, it was as if he had no idea what had happened. I was honestly pretty scared of John because he acted so differently than I had ever seen him, and I felt like I didn't know him at all. About 2 weeks later, we were talking on the phone, and I asked, "Are we going to talk about the other night?" He felt absolutely awful and embarrassed about the few parts he remembered and said, "No, let's not talk about that, please." John and I usually talk about everything. There are almost no boundaries to what our conversations cover, but since that night, we have only mentioned it briefly. He only remembered the very beginning when he wanted to solo with me. I've mostly only brought up the shower and the cleanup, but I've never told him everything he did that night. Well, if you're reading this, John, that's all the crap you put me through that night. We've been drinking and smoking together for about 2 years now, and he has never acted like that again. I guess he learned a valuable lesson that night. Don't drink a whole bottle of whiskey and come on to your best friend. Story 8. I have a reasonably dark story. It happened with my first girlfriend, and the never speak about this part of it was especially poignant. I will try to share the important points without dragging on too long. I was 18 or 19. This was my first relationship. My childhood was not terrible, but I moved around too much with my family and had a hard time making friends. Still, I was the listener. Rye used to call me her scribe, and she was my muse, sickly sweet and the dorkiest possible embodiment of my adolescence. I know, but this is important, because I had a keen memory and a cathartic, some might say codependent, way of using my empathy to absorb the grief of others in a flailing attempt to process my own. Cry me a popsicle river, says Dr. Freud, but that is my spiel. Take it with a grain of salt. Now, Orr was an unexpected arrival in my life, completely out of left field. She was a few years older than me and went to the other high school in my district. We had mutual friends in the theater departments of both schools. One day, she messaged me on AM, nostalgic, wistful sigh, told me who she was and who had given her my screen name, and we started chatting. She was quick to open up, and by the end of our first conversation, we had barreled straight into friendship. At first, I assumed Ard was a lesbian, mostly because she sought my counsel in dealing with her extremely toxic and emotionally manipulative girlfriend. But as we talked more, I learned several critical things about her. First, she came from an extremely religious household and was raised with a sharply unattainable standard of decency and purity. Secondly, she revealed about her past abuse and had said nothing about it for a long time. I became the paragon of consolation. Every problem, even those I could not relate to, could be heard and gently unraveled, leaving clarity in its wake. I listened and refrained from forming opinions or passing judgment. Over time, I learned that it was her brother. That was all she ever told me before. Turning pale and changing the subject, I didn't push. Fast forward a year. Raw broke up with her girlfriend, and I helped her through it. Things started getting serious between us. Raw and I dated for a few months, nervously stumbling through it, until she broke up with me, insisting that we stay friends. Safe to say, by this point, I was completely in love with her. If she wanted to break up, I resolved that I would win her back one day. I did, actually, more than once. But that isn't the point of this story. At this stage, we were in an off period of our on and off relationship. Whether it was because she was terrified of intimacy and constantly wrestling with letting me get closer, or because I was a clingy, codependent person who needed her in my life even if it brought me pain, or perhaps both, we remained intimately best friended, feelings be damned. It was during this time that she met a guy, K, whom she liked. Much to my chagrin and secret resentment, I gave her my blessing and redoubled my dedication as her most trusted confidant. This is where the story takes a dark turn. One day, she and I went to get burgers. On the way, Rye began expressing reservations about K, small things that had been nagging at her. Among them, there was something wrong with his face. She couldn't put her finger on it. He wasn't deformed or unattractive. It was just a gnawing feeling. After some thought, she finally pinned down her uneasiness. His face, the features, the shape, whatever it was, reminded her of her brother. At first, I did not immediately notice how hollow her voice sounded, but over the course of an hour, it became impossible to ignore. At first, she didn't mention details so much as how she felt about her brother, about the abuse, about Kay. At one point, I looked up, and her face had taken on an expression I did not recognize. Her eyes were red and pained, staring distantly ahead. Her jaw was clenched so tightly I could feel her teeth grinding through the hard plastic table. She was holding back tears like someone barely containing their strength. It took only one, "Are you okay?" from me for her to stand, flatly ask me to take her back to my house, and drift out of the restaurant as if she were a wraith. I was head over heels in love with this person, who now radiated pain and agony where there was usually joy and spirit. All I wanted was to see her feel safe, loved, and not so helplessly alone. That said, as a somewhat sheltered immigrant in the throes of his first serious relationship, I had no idea what I was getting into. Suffice to say, I was terrified. My only clear objective was to keep her talking. We went back to my house. I asked if she wanted to come up to my room, relax, maybe talk. She said nothing, followed me upstairs, and sat on my bed. For the next 2 or 3 hours, she described the things she had been through. The disturbing part wasn't the account itself, it was the way she spoke. She seemed unable to convey emotion in her tone or posture. She stared off into nothing. She answered my questions, but her responses were not directed at me. They were meant for the shadows in the room. Several times, she spoke to me as though I were her brother, once as though I were her father. After a few hours, something I asked jarred her suddenly. She shook her head, as if waking from a nightmare. The distance in her gaze shifted. Sadness, anger, revulsion, emotions cycling too rapidly to name. Without saying a word, she gathered her purse and sweater and let autopilot carry her outside. I followed, heart and mind racing in opposite directions, and called her name as she climbed into her car. For the first time since this began, she looked into my eyes and spoke 3 words before driving off. "Don't call me." I went back inside, closed my door, and slowly regained my composure. This was my best friend, and I had no idea what to do or whether I had done something wrong. I was shaken, as you can imagine. Remember my penchant for scribing? I did the only thing I could think of. I wrote down everything she had said, word for word, to the best of my memory. It filled about 10 pages of lined paper, which I sealed in an envelope. 3 days later, I went to R's house to check on her. I approached her as she was leaving and handed her the envelope. She asked what was inside. I told her I had made a record of everything she had told me that Wednesday. Let's pretend that's the day it was. She looked genuinely perplexed and insisted that she and I hadn't hung out on Wednesday. I told her that in fact we had. She admitted then that she had no solid recollection of what we did or even what we had talked about that day. She took the envelope. We never spoke about that day or her past ever again. We dated on and off for a total of about 3 years until she broke up with me and moved on with her life. As we parted ways, we returned all the keepsakes, love letters, and goofy baubles we had made, collected or otherwise acquired during our troubled union. Among the personal effects returned during this tumultuous purge, slipped unceremoniously into an unsealed manila mailing envelope, was the still sealed letter. Some considerable time later, I told her I had burned that envelope. She didn't even have to ask which one I meant. She knew. She said one word. Good. Epilogue. For those still invested. I lied to Werd and kept the letter. I kept it as a lesson to myself that some experiences are powerful enough, stressful enough, traumatic enough to override the very mechanism of consciousness. I learned that there is no objective interpretation of reality. There is only the now, which is merely an extension of what always is and has always been. To mature as a human is to learn to adapt one's own perception of that now, and when a traumatic event occurs, the developing brain can become trapped in that now. The point I am trying to make is that the hardest thing for any individual is to provide a cohesive narrative for the messed up things that happen to us as a result of this terminal condition. We all share mortality. Sometimes, the only thing a narrative lacks is a reliable frame of reference. When we vent, often that is all we are asking for: to be heard. Listen to understand, not to respond. Every one of us is fighting the same difficult fight within ourselves. We are at our most vulnerable when we are already in pain. Talk to someone. Learn to trust others. Share their sorrows as well as your own. You are but one, but we are not alone. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.